What if the story of our world did not begin where the textbooks tell us it did? What if the rise of civilization, the moment humans built cities, learned to write, and look to the stars, was only a return, not a beginning? Beneath deserts and seas, beneath myths and memories, there may lie the echoes of something far older. Older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older even than time as we count it. Welcome to Dreams of History. Tonight, we travel beyond the edge of recorded memory, into an age that might have been forgotten, but perhaps never truly lost. You are about to hear not just a history, but a whisper from another world. One that asks a single haunting question. What if the Sumerians weren't the first civilization on Earth? In every ancient ruin, there is a silence that speaks. The stones of Sumer still rise from the dust of Iraq, carrying marks pressed into clay 5,000 years ago. Cuneiform tablets, simple wedges of meaning, record trade, laws, prayers, and dreams. They tell us of gods descending from the heavens, of kings who ruled for thousands of years, of floods that wiped the world clean. Historians call this myth. But what if myth is memory? What if these stories are not imagination, but inheritance? For centuries, scholars believed civilization began in Sumer, the cradle of humanity's organized life. Here, they said, writing was born, kingship appeared, temples rose, law was carved in clay. Yet each discovery seems to whisper a contradiction. Under every city lies another. Under every age, a shadow of something older. As we dig deeper into time, the pattern repeats. Sophisticated artifacts, knowledge that should not exist, and sudden leaps instead of gradual progress. It's as though humanity woke up more than once. The Sumerians themselves never claimed to be the first. They said kingship descended from heaven. They said civilization was delivered, not invented. To them, the first city was Eridu, built under the guidance of gods who came from the sky. Even their language, strange and isolate, connects to none that came after. It is as if they carried it from somewhere else, some lost mother tongue of a forgotten world. When you walk among the ruins of Eridu, now only mounds of clay, you can feel it, the eerie calm of beginnings that don't quite feel like beginnings. Archaeologists found the city's foundations stacked layer upon layer, each rebuilt in the same sacred plan, as if preserving a memory older than themselves. The earliest level dates back over 7,000 years, yet even then, it was already a temple complex, not a village. No primitive trial and error, just design, purpose, knowledge, who taught them. This is where the question deepens, because every civilization that rose after Sumer, Egypt, the Indus, the Maya, the Chinese, claimed the same thing, that their wisdom came from before, from teachers who vanished, from gods, shining ones, sages who walked the earth and left behind laws, calendars and stars carved in stone, different names, same story. Could there have been an older civilization, advanced, global, and wiped away long before Sumer ever breathed? If so, where are its cities, its monuments, its remains? Perhaps beneath the seas that rose when the last ice age ended. Perhaps in myths we no longer believe. Perhaps in us. Modern science now tells us that around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. The Younger Dryas, the last great climate catastrophe, ended the ice age in fire and flood. Temperatures rose, glaciers melted, oceans surged, and entire continents reshaped. And almost overnight, humans went from scattered hunter-gatherers to temple builders, astronomers, and engineers. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey appears suddenly, already sophisticated. A line to stars, carved with symbols, built by people who should not yet have known how to build. No trial period, no primitive stage, just genius, ready-made. It is as if knowledge survived the flood and returned, disguised as dawn. So when the Sumerians spoke of a world before the flood, of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years, were they preserving that memory? Were they the heirs of an age erased by water? Tonight, we follow that thread, from the clay tablets of Sumer to the buried stones of forgotten continents, from the myths of gods and floods to the strange clues left in our DNA. Every whisper points to one unsettling idea, that history, as we know it, might be only the latest chapter of a story much older, much stranger, and perhaps far more human than we dare believe. Civilization may not have begun in Sumer. It may have returned there, and what came before might explain not only our myths, but our very origins. So lie back, let the noise fade, and listen. The past is calling, not from the pages of textbooks, but from beneath the layers of time. This is Dreams of History, and this is the story of the world before the world began. They say time moves forward, but when you study the ruins of forgotten worlds, it feels more like a tide. Each wave of civilization rises, shines, and breaks, leaving fragments for the next to find. The Sumerians were not born from emptiness. They stood upon the bones of something older, but older than what? How far back does the tide go? To answer that, we have to leave Mesopotamia and walk backwards through the ages, beyond Babylon, beyond the first kings, beyond even writing itself. We arrive at a world half drowned, half remembered, when the last ice still clung to the poles and humanity lived in the shadow of melting glaciers. It was a time of endings, but also of memory. The Earth then was not the Earth we know. Sea levels were 400 feet lower, and the coastlines stretched far into what are now the deep shelves of the Atlantic and the Pacific. Where oceans shimmer today, once stood valleys, plains, and cities now lost beneath the waves. Legends of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of sunken realms scattered across cultures may not be mere stories, but distant recollections of that drowned world. Archaeologists hesitate to call them proof, yet they find traces. Cut stone blocks beneath the waters of Yonaguni near Japan, massive terraces off the coast of Cuba, geometric ruins off India's Gulf of Kambat. Coincidence, they say. Nature's tricks, but nature rarely carves symmetry, and the sea keeps its secrets well. Imagine that world as the Ice Age ended. Glaciers cracked, rivers swelled, and a wall of water consumed everything built too close to the sea. To those who survived, it must have felt like the end of creation itself. But memory endures. When their children rebuilt, they spoke of a great flood that erased an earlier age. The Sumerians wrote it on clay. The Hebrews wove it into Genesis. The Egyptians carved it in stone. Each one remembered a time when the gods walked with men and the sky itself changed. If such a civilization existed, what did it leave behind? Perhaps not cities of steel, but ideas. Mathematics, astronomy, architecture, law. Perhaps those ideas survived as whispers carried by wandering survivors, passed down through tribes until someone, somewhere, remembered enough to rebuild. Maybe that is why Sumer appears suddenly, fully formed. The spark was not born there, it was reignited. The Sumerian texts speak of beings who came from the heavens, Anunnaki, the shining ones. They brought kingship, knowledge, agriculture, and the stars. To modern ears, it sounds like myth. To ancient people, it was memory. And to us, it may be metaphor for the transmission of wisdom from an earlier, forgotten world. Because every ancient culture shares this story. In Egypt, the god Thoth arrives after a great flood to teach writing and geometry. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl descends from the sky bringing calendars and crops. In India, Manu survives the deluge and rebuilds civilization with divine guidance. Different lands, same sequence. Catastrophe, survival, instruction. It's as if scattered survivors of a single lost age carried fragments of knowledge to every shore they reached. When you step into the British Museum and see the Sumerian tablets under glass, they look small, unimposing, fragile, but what they hold inside them is enormous. The idea that humanity has lived many lives. Each civilization inherits the ashes of another. We call it myth because it humbles us to think we are not the first. Look closer at the clay. The wedges of cuneiform are not just records, they are remembrance. They tell of Eridu, the first city, founded when kingship descended from heaven. They tell of a flood that ended an age, of 8 great rulers whose reigns stretched for hundreds of centuries. Numbers too vast for the human mind. Some scholars see symbolism, others see calculation. Each reign is a perfect multiple of 3,600 years, a unit the Sumerians called a sar. Coincidence again, or the echo of a cycle measured not in human time, but in cosmic rhythm? Perhaps the ancients remembered the heavens differently. Their kings were not only rulers of earth, but keepers of time, their reigns tied to the turning of celestial wheels. The Anunnaki may not have been beings from another world, but symbols of that link between sky and earth, those who understood the patterns of stars and passed them down so that mankind would never forget. Even today, buried in the myths of gods descending from heaven is a quiet truth. Knowledge is never lost. It only waits to be rediscovered. And the Sumerians, those first dreamers of recorded time, might have been the keepers of a fire lit long before them. So what if they were not the beginning, but the continuation? What if the birth of civilization was simply the memory of an age before the flood, reborn in clay, in temple, in song? That question follows us through every ruin, every inscription, every whisper of the past. And perhaps that is why the Sumerians wrote not only of kings and floods, but of longing, the feeling that something greater had once been, and that mankind lived in its shadow. When you listen carefully, you can still hear that longing in every myth, in every prayer, in every dream of paradise lost. This is where the story truly begins. Not with what we found, but with what we remember. Because to dream of history is to admit that somewhere inside us, the past is not dead. It's waiting to be awakened. When the ancients spoke of the flood, they did not describe it as a story of punishment. They described it as memory, the moment when the sky broke open and the earth remembered its power. Every culture called it by a different name, but the image never changed. The waters rose, the cities fell, and silence claimed the world. For the Sumerians, that silence divided time itself. Everything before the flood was an age of gods. Everything after was the age of men. And yet, what kind of world existed before that line? What kind of rulers could measure their lives not in years or decades, but in spans of thousands of centuries? The Sumerian King List preserves their names like faint constellations across a dark sky. Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenluana, Enmengalana Dumuzid, Enpadzidana, Enmendarana, and Ubara Tutu. 8 kings who ruled for 241,000 years. To the modern ear, it sounds impossible, but the ancients were not careless with numbers. They carved them with intention, as if recording the rhythm of heaven itself. Imagine standing in Eridu, the first city. The marsh wind moves through reeds. The temple to Enki gleams in the morning light. Priests lift water from the canals, whispering the same words that have echoed for thousands of years. To them, kingship was not political. It was cosmic. It descended just as rain descends from the clouds, a sacred force that bound heaven and earth. The first king, Alulim, was said to have reigned for 28,800 years. He was not elected, not crowned by men, but chosen by the gods themselves. His reign marked the dawn, not the birth of a kingdom, but of order itself. Under him, chaos retreated, and the world took form. To the people of Eridu, time was circular. Each reign mirrored the motion of the stars, each king a reflection of a larger pattern. When Alulgar followed, he ruled for 36,000 years, 10 sars. To the Sumerians, the number 10 meant completion. It represented the moment when heaven's design found balance on earth. Alulgar's rule was remembered as calm, perfect, enduring. Not the storm of conquest, but the steady rhythm of eternity. After him came Enmenluana, whose throne stood in Bad Tibera, the city of the forge. He ruled for 43,200 years, 12 sars, a full zodiac, a full cycle of the heavens. The ancients said he was the keeper of the sacred flame, the one who taught mankind the secret of metal, of transformation, to melt stone, to forge copper, to master fire. These were acts of creation, divine mimicry, and so his city glowed in the night, furnaces blazing like stars reborn on earth. Each king that followed reflected a facet of civilization's birth. One guarded wisdom, another guided law, another carried the mysteries of the underworld, of death and renewal. Together they formed a chain linking heaven to earth, and when their time ended, it did not end in war or decay. It ended with the flood. A clean break, a line drawn by water. Then the flood swept over, the tablets say. No explanation, no poetry, just that. Then the flood swept over. To the scribes, it was not fiction. It was memory written in clay. Archaeologists, centuries later, would find the same evidence in the earth itself. A layer of silt cutting across the ruins of Shuruppak and Ur, proof that once, long ago, the rivers of Mesopotamia rose higher than the sky. When the waters receded, life began again, but everything had changed. The kings who came after lived shorter lives, hundreds of years, then tens. The gods withdrew, the heavens grew silent, and yet kingship continued, passed like a fading torch from one age to the next. The Sumerians remembered that continuity, and through them, so did we. If the flood was real, and so many civilizations agree it was, then what vanished beneath its waves? Temples, cities, or perhaps something greater? The first blueprint of civilization itself. To rebuild, the survivors would need more than strength. They would need memory, and so they carried it. In stories, in symbols, in sacred numbers. When the world dried, they laid foundations again, guided by echoes of what once was. Eridu rose, Uruk followed, Nippur, Kish, Lagash. Each city mirrored a forgotten pattern, as if they remembered how the world was meant to be arranged. This is why Sumer appears suddenly, impossibly advanced, because it was not born from ignorance, but from remembrance. Their ziggurats were not experiments, they were recreations. Their gods were not inventions, they were memories given names. And their flood was not metaphor, it was trauma turned to ritual, grief shaped into story. The more we study those tablets, the more human they feel. They are not just history, they are therapy, a civilization trying to remember what it lost and to make sense of why. In every wedge of cuneiform lies the ache of survivors. The kings are not superheroes, they are symbols of endurance. They remind us that every beginning is born from an ending, and every ending leaves a seed. So when we speak of the first civilization, perhaps we should whisper, because the first may not have been Sumer at all. It may have been a world before the flood, a world whose memory became our mythology, whose ruins became our roots, and maybe, just maybe, we are the ones still rebuilding it, one story at a time. When the waters retreated, they left behind more than ruins. They left memory buried in mud, waiting for hands that could remember how to build again. Humanity stepped out from the wreckage, staring at a sky that suddenly felt distant, emptied of the gods who once walked below it. But the survivors carried a map that no flood could wash away. A map written not on stone, but inside the mind. Some went south, following the rivers into what would become Egypt. Some wandered east, along the mountains into the Indus Valley. Others crossed forgotten land bridges into the islands and the distant Americas. Wherever they went, they carried fragments, the mathematics of the heavens, the geometry of temples, the rhythm of calendars that measured not the harvest, but the stars. And everywhere those fragments reappeared, the same patterns were reborn under new names. In Egypt, the flood was remembered as the inundation of Nun, when the world drowned and the god Thoth restored order. Thoth, like Enki of Sumer, was the master of words, the keeper of divine measurement, the one who taught humankind to rebuild. He did not invent knowledge, he returned it. The temples along the Nile, from Abydos to Saqqara, repeat the same geometry found in Mesopotamia, the same sacred ratios, the same obsession with aligning stone to starlight. It is as if the masons of Egypt were completing a memory begun in another land. Across the desert and the sea, the story continued. In the Indus Valley, cities rose that mirrored Mesopotamian grids, their streets aligned with cardinal points, their seals etched with symbols still undeciphered. In those markings, some see the same sacred mathematics, spirals, suns, serpents, emblems of continuity. The flood appears again in their myths. Manu, warned by a god in the form of a fish, builds a great boat to save the seed of life. When the waters recede, he begins the world anew. It is the same story told in different tongues, a shared trauma carried across continents. Even farther east, in the highlands of China, the ancient emperors spoke of the mandate of heaven, the right to rule descending from the sky. It is the echo of kingship descending from heaven in Sumer, different soil, same inheritance. And in the far west among the Maya, the Popol Vuh begins with a flood and the rebuilding of humankind from maize, a new flesh, for an old memory. What connects these stories is not coincidence, but pattern, the same rhythm beating, beneath thousands of miles and thousands of years. It suggests that the survivors of one world became the teachers of the next. Wherever they arrived, civilization ignited. They brought with them the sense that life was a gift from the sky, that order must be preserved, that knowledge was sacred and dangerous all at once. And everywhere they built toward the heavens, pyramids, ziggurats, terraces, towers, as if trying to bridge the distance between themselves and the gods who had gone. The Sumerians called their towers Etemenanki, the house that binds heaven and earth. The Egyptians called theirs the Benben, the first mound that rose from the flood. The Maya called theirs the stairways of Kukulkan, where serpents of light crawled down at the equinox. Everywhere, the architecture whispered the same message. We remember. Perhaps that is the real legacy of the flood. Not destruction, but determination. Humanity refused to forget. It built monuments so enormous that memory could no longer be drowned. And each structure, in its own way, was a message to the future. We were here before. We will be here again. Science now traces our DNA through those same routes of migration. Every modern human carries traces of that one surviving lineage, the children of catastrophe who repopulated the earth. The double helix itself is a record of endurance, the same story written not in clay, but in flesh. Our genes remember storms we have forgotten. They remember hunger, fire, and loss. They remember kings who lived too long and cities swallowed by sea. They remember the flood. When you look at the stars tonight, you are gazing at the same sky those survivors saw as they rebuilt their world. To them, the heavens were a clock, not for hours, but for ages. They saw time as cycles, not lines, and they believed that what had been destroyed would return when the wheel turned again. Maybe that is why so many cultures speak of golden ages, of yugas, of worlds that rise and fall in repeating order. To them, the flood was not the end. It was one turning of a greater cycle, an age that collapses so another may begin. And in each new age, the memory of the last lingers in myths, in numbers, in the geometry of stone. Civilization, then, is not a straight road but a spiral staircase, circling the same truths from different heights. Sumer, Egypt, the Indus, the Maya, each a new landing on that eternal climb. And at the center of that spiral, the same flame burns, the dream that knowledge once came from beyond, and that to build is to remember. When the Sumerians pressed their styluses into wet clay, they were not inventing writing. They were carving echoes. They were reminding themselves that language could preserve what the flood could not. Every wedge of cuneiform is a defiance against oblivion, a way of saying, the gods may leave, but we will still tell their story. That story is ours now. Perhaps that is the meaning of when kingship descended from heaven. Not that beings from the stars came down to rule us, but that humanity once received the spark of order, of meaning, of self-awareness, and has been trying ever since to live up to it. We are taught that history is a line, neat, tidy, progressing from primitive to modern. But what if it is not a line at all? What if it is a pulse, beating through the ages, rising and falling like breath? Every civilization we know may be only a heartbeat in a much longer rhythm, a song humanity keeps forgetting how to sing. The Sumerians remembered fragments of that song. They spoke of rulers who lived for thousands of years, of floods that erased memory, of gods who descended from heaven not as myth, but as memory. The Egyptians remembered it too. They called it the Zep Tepi, the first time when the gods walked among men. The Maya remembered it in their long count calendar, measuring vast cycles of creation and destruction. And even our oldest scriptures whisper of it. The Book of Genesis, the Rig Veda, the Popol Vuh, all repeating the same dream. Once, long ago, the world was whole. Science, in its own language, now begins to echo that same idea. In our DNA are signatures older than we imagined, traces of lineages that predate known humanity, evidence that we have survived not one extinction, but several. Each time, life began again. Each time, memory faded. But the instinct to build, to reach upward, returned. Perhaps this is what myth was always trying to tell us, that we are not only children of evolution, but of remembrance. We build not just because we can, but because we must. Because something within us remembers how it felt to live in the shadow of the stars. That feeling, that longing, is older than civilization itself. Look at the Sumerian ziggurat and the Egyptian pyramids side by side. Different continents, same idea. Ascent. To climb closer to the heavens, to rebuild the bridge once lost. Even today, in our cities of glass and steel, the shape persists. Towers reaching for clouds, monuments to eternity. We think we build for progress. Maybe we build for memory. The flood ended an age, but it did not end the dream. The survivors passed it down. The numbers, the cycles, the whispers of kings who ruled too long to be mortal. And through them, through clay and story and bone, the dream reached us. Every myth you've ever heard may be a coded message from the world before the flood. A message that says, you have been here before. The Sumerians did not invent time. They rediscovered it. They measured it not as seconds ticking forward, but as circles, endless and eternal. They saw each age as a breath of the divine. One exhaled into chaos, one inhaled into creation. And maybe that's why their king list ends where it does, with the flood. Not because it was the end, but because it was the point where the breath turned inward again. For thousands of years after, humanity would try to remember, to recreate the lost order, to rebuild the world as it was before it fell. And every age that rose carried the same pattern, the same hope, the same fear, that we are not the first, and that we will not be the last. Maybe that is why, even now, we look to the sky and feel something we cannot name. It is not just curiosity, it is recognition. The stars above Sumer are the same stars above us. They watched as the first cities rose and fell, as floods came and went, as history wrote and rewrote itself. They will watch us too. One day, the ruins of our world may lie buried beneath another flood, another silence. But if we have learned anything from the ancients, it is this: the story will not die. Someone, somewhere, will dig into the dust and find a shard, a mark, a name, and they will wonder, just as we wonder now, what came before. That is the heartbeat of history. Not progress, not conquest, remembrance. Every civilization is a dream the earth dreams again. The Sumerians dreamed it first in clay. We dream it now in light. And perhaps in some distant age, others will dream it in stars. So when we ask, what if the Sumerians weren't the first civilization on Earth? We are not questioning the past. We are remembering it. Because deep down, across every myth and every ruin, one truth remains. We are the children of many, worlds born from water, carried by memory, forever rebuilding what the flood could not erase. This is dreams of history, and this is only the beginning. They called it the flood that erased the world, but maybe it only erased the surface. Beneath the waters, something older still waited, sleeping, buried, almost breathing. If the Sumerians inherited the memory of a lost world, then somewhere that world must have left its bones behind. Archaeology has begun to find them. Pieces of cities that should not exist. Stone cut before there was supposed to be stone cutters. Architecture more precise than the tools that history allows. Every discovery challenges the line we draw between myth and fact. Every new site is another whisper that the story of humanity might have started long before Sumer. High in the hills of southeastern Turkey, where dust shimmers under the sun, lies a place that should not be possible, Göbekli Tepe. For centuries it slept under layers of soil until the late 20th century, when the earth was peeled away and something unimaginable emerged. Stone circles. Massive pillars carved with animals, symbols, and strange humanoid forms. The dating stunned the world. More than 11,000 years old, twice as old as Sumer. Older even than agriculture itself. According to our timeline, humans at that point were simple hunter-gatherers, living in tents and caves, following herds across the plains. They were not supposed to know how to quarry, shape, and transport 40-ton stones. They were not supposed to build temples aligned to the stars. And yet they did. Göbekli Tepe is not the work of a primitive people finding their first spark of culture. It is the work of memory, of minds remembering what their ancestors once knew. Its pillars form circles like the movements of planets. Its carvings, foxes, vultures, scorpions, may be constellations mapped in stone. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, covered with soil and rubble, as if its builders feared it being found. Why hide what they had made? Perhaps they knew what was coming. Perhaps they saw the flood not as myth, but as an approaching horizon. To the north and west, across the sea, other sites whisper the same story. In Lebanon, the platform of Baalbek stands with stones so huge that even modern cranes struggle to lift them. Each block weighs more than 1,000 tons. They fit together with perfect precision, as if cast from a single mold. Scholars say later Romans built upon it. But even the Romans left the biggest blocks untouched, calling them the work of gods. Across the world in Bolivia, high on the Andean plateau, lie the shattered remains of Pumapunku. Stones cut with machine-like accuracy, angles sharp as modern steel. Archaeologists say it belonged to the Tiwanaku culture, but no one can explain how such precision existed before metallurgy. Each doorway, each groove, each notch looks less like art and more like engineering, as if the builders remembered technology long lost and tried with what they had left to copy it. And far below the Pacific, near Japan's island of Yonaguni, divers swim among step terraces, stairs and walls now draped in coral. The sea has claimed them, but their shape is unmistakable. Geometry where only geology should be. Nature does not carve symmetry this perfect. Someone built it, and the ocean took it. All these places share one impossible truth. They are older than the civilizations that are supposed to have built them. They exist in a time before Sumer, before Egypt, before even history itself began. A time when someone, understood how to align stone with stars, how to turn chaos into pattern. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas, the end of the last ice age. 12,000 years ago, a global catastrophe struck the Earth. The temperature plummeted, then soared. Ice sheets collapsed. Oceans rose by hundreds of feet. Entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. Whatever stood before that moment was washed away. And yet not everything died. Because somehow, in the centuries that followed, humans appeared out of nowhere with skills that should have taken millennia to learn. They built megaliths. They measured the heavens. They invented agriculture almost overnight. It is as if they were remembering rather than discovering. Göbekli Tepe, Pumapunku, Baalbek, they may all be aftershocks of the same forgotten world. Perhaps not a single empire, but a network of cultures that shared knowledge before the flood divided the continents. When the seas rose, That network shattered, and its survivors wandered into the mountains and plains, carrying fragments of memory. In time, those fragments would become the myths of gods descending from the sky, the stories of teachers who rebuilt the world after destruction. And one day those myths would reach the land between two rivers, and there, in the clay of Sumer, they would be reborn as history. We think of civilization as an invention, but what if it is an inheritance? What if every city, every language, every number we know is a translation of something much older, a pattern that survived the flood and now hides within us, just waiting to be remembered? The Sumerians called that pattern me, divine decrees, sacred laws that shaped the world. They said the god Enki kept them in his temple in Eridu, stored on tablets that contained the rules for everything, for kingship, for wisdom, for music, for light. To receive them was to become civilized. But perhaps me was more than law. Perhaps it was memory, the collective knowledge of a world before the flood, encoded not by gods, but by humans who refused to let it vanish. The more we search, the more the pieces begin to connect, not as separate stories, but as fragments of one vast memory scattered across the world. Each culture, each myth, each ruin seems to speak the same ancient language, though the accents have changed. It's as if the earth itself is trying to remember what it once was. Across continents, symbols repeat. Spirals, serpents, suns, eyes, triangles, wings, everywhere. The same geometry, the same obsession with balance, symmetry, and cycles. It cannot be coincidence. It is pattern, the oldest language of all. In Sumer, the serpent was Enki's emblem, the god of wisdom and water. In Egypt, it became the symbol of Thoth, the divine scribe, also lord of wisdom and water. In Mesoamerica, the same image slithers through stone, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought light and law after the flood. And in India, the serpent Ananta coils around creation itself, infinite and eternal. Different continents, same teacher, different names, same memory. Even their temples share a strange kinship. Step pyramids rise in Sumer and Egypt, in Cambodia, in Mexico, always reaching upward, always built upon layers of the earth like the spine of some forgotten titan. All of them aligned to the stars, Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades, the same constellations across the world. How could people who never met, separated by oceans, follow the same cosmic blueprint, unless that blueprint was older than their separation, unless it came from a time before the oceans divided us? There are maps that should not exist. The Piri race map, drawn in the 1500s, shows the coast of Antarctica without ice, a shape that could only have been seen before the last ice age, thousands of years earlier. The Orontius Phineus map does the same. Historians insist they are accidents, coincidences, but the accuracy is too precise, the detail too perfect. Who drew the originals those explorers copied? What eyes saw Antarctica before it froze? The world before the flood must have had cartographers, navigators, mathematicians, people who understood the Earth as a globe long before the first compass. Ancient astronomy tells the same story. The builders of Göbekli Tepe aligned their stones to the constellation of Cygnus. Its wings spread like a cross in the northern sky. At the same time, thousands of miles away in Egypt, temples aligned to Orion and Sirius, the stars the pharaohs believed were the gates of the gods. In South America, the Nazca people carved massive lines visible only from above, shapes of birds, fish, and serpents pointing to celestial alignments. Everywhere, eyes fixed upward, memory projected into the sky. What were they all looking for? Or perhaps, what were they all remembering? When the flood came, it erased cities, not the sky. The stars remained, and maybe the survivors, standing on the new shores of a drowned world, looked up and saw those same constellations that had guided their ancestors. To rebuild, they copied the heavens on earth, temples as maps of the stars, stone circles as models of the universe. In doing so, they created a bridge between the lost and the living. Even time itself carries their signature. The Sumerians divided the sky into 12 houses. each representing a phase of the sun's journey. The zodiac we still use today. The Egyptians followed the same division. The Maya measured cosmic cycles of 20 and 13, adding up to 260, a number that recurs in every sacred calendar on Earth. Different systems, one rhythm, the pulse of a forgotten science older than recorded history. Science today calls it precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis over 25,920 years. But how did the ancients know it? They tracked it in myth. 12 ages, 12 animal symbols, 12 gods, each age ending in flood, fire, or darkness. The Mayan calendar, the Hindu yugas, the Sumerian King List. Each one measures the same grand cycle, the cosmic breath between destruction and rebirth. We believe we invented astronomy, but perhaps we only remembered it. We believe we mapped the stars, but maybe we are tracing old lines carved into the sky by minds long gone. Perhaps those minds once looked up and thought, if the heavens never forget, neither should we. All across the planet, megaliths still stand like punctuation marks in that forgotten sentence. Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, Angkor Wat, Giza, Tiwanaku, each one a word in the same ancient language of light and shadow. They mark solstices, equinoxes, the movement of the stars. They are not random. They are reminders. The Earth remembers, even when we do not. What if those monuments were never meant as temples or tombs, but as memory devices, libraries of stone, each one preserving a fragment of the lost world's science? Every angle, every alignment, every measurement a message left behind. This has happened before. It will happen again. The ancients may have understood something we've forgotten, that history itself is not progress, but pattern. That knowledge, if not carried forward, will drown, and so they built it into the landscape, into mountains, into geometry, into myth, so that even if their words were lost, their message would endure. Perhaps that is what civilization really means. Not cities or laws or tools, but the ability to remember through catastrophe. The will to leave a message for those who come next. And now, thousands of years later, we are the ones who have found their message. But do we understand it? Or are we simply repeating the cycle once more, believing ourselves the first, even as the tide turns again? Maybe the flood did not destroy everything. Maybe it only scattered the pages of a book that humanity has spent 12,000 years trying to read again. Some pages we call myth, some archaeology, some science, but together they spell the same story. When the survivors of that world spread across the earth, they did not all forget. They carried fragments of language, numbers, and the memory of a world that had known the stars intimately. Those fragments became the seed of every civilization that came after. Sumer gave us the wheel and the written word. Egypt gave us geometry, medicine, and the calendar. India gave us mathematics and cosmic cycles. China gave us astronomy and the art of balance. Each one a voice in the same chorus, each one remembering differently what the flood had tried to erase. Our own science is only beginning to translate their language. Geneticists now trace every person on Earth to a handful of small populations who lived through the last ice age. In our blood, we carry the story of survivors, a tale of exodus and return written not on tablets, but in the double helix, the same spiral that the ancients carved into temples and stones. They may not have known the word DNA, but they understood the symbol. They called it the serpent of life, the twin dragons, the caduceus, two forces entwined, creation and memory rising together. In every ancient text, the serpent is not evil. It is knowledge itself. It lives in the depths, like memory buried under time. When it rises, the world is reborn. Maybe they were trying to tell us that knowledge, like DNA, survives through destruction. It coils, it sleeps, it awakens again when the time is right. Geology, too, begins to whisper the same truth. Beneath the polar ice, cores reveal sudden spikes in temperature, layers of ash, traces of cosmic dust. Something struck our planet near the end of the Ice Age. a rain of fire that melted glaciers and darkened the sky. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Myth calls it the wrath of the gods. Different words for the same event. The fire fell, the ice melted, the oceans rose, and the world was changed forever. Yet almost immediately after that devastation, something extraordinary happened. Human creativity exploded. Cave art, architecture, agriculture, writing, all within a few thousand years. To call it coincidence would be to ignore the rhythm of the earth itself. Perhaps catastrophe and creation are not opposites, but partners. Perhaps each destruction opens a space for memory to return. The Sumerians said the gods taught them the me, the sacred codes of civilization. But what if those gods were not divine, but human? The last survivors of the lost world, preserving what they could. They taught the art of irrigation, how to read the stars, how to measure the sky and the seasons. They gave the shape of law, the pattern of number, the idea of order itself. In time, their children would forget their names and call them gods, but the knowledge remained. Even in our language, their memory survives. Words like earth, human, spirit all trace back to roots that mean breath, clay, and memory. To be human, in the oldest sense, is to remember what has been forgotten. Astronomy confirms what myth has always sung. Every 26,000 years, the Earth wobbles through the heavens, its axis tracing a circle among the stars. The ancients knew this long before telescopes. They built temples as clocks, watching constellations shift over centuries, marking the slow procession that resets the sky. They called each full cycle a great year, the lifetime of a world. At the end of each, catastrophe, then rebirth. We are near that turning again. The same alignments the ancients marked have returned to the heavens. To them, such a moment was not doom, but awakening. The time when memory stirs and forgotten knowledge rises like land from the sea. Maybe that is why we dig, why we search, why we dream of history at all. Some part of us knows that something is calling from below the layers of dust, from within the silence of stone. When archaeologists brush sand from a tablet, they are not uncovering history. They are waking a voice that has waited millennia to speak. And that voice says, "You have been here before. You will be here again." The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Mayans, the builders of Göbekli Tepe. They were not separate stories. They were chapters of one long narrative. Humanity remembering itself through cycles of forgetting. Each age inherits the ashes of the one before. Each age builds higher, then falls, and the ashes scatter once more. Maybe that is why when we stand among ancient ruins, we feel something like nostalgia. It is not for their stones, but for our own memory. Something inside us recognizes the pattern, the curve of a column, the shadow of a ziggurat, the line of a star. It is the same pattern that once guided hands older than ours. The flood was not the end, it was the reset, and from that reset, civilization bloomed again. But the message remained, carved into the world itself. Nothing is truly lost, only hidden. Knowledge, like life, always finds a way back to the light. Perhaps the gods never left. Perhaps they became us. Maybe remembering is what the universe itself does. Stars die, and from their ashes new stars are born, carrying the dust of the old within their light. Galaxies breathe in rhythm. Expansion, collapse, rebirth. Why should humanity be any different? We too are made of memory. The same atoms that once burned in forgotten suns now form our hands, our eyes, our thoughts. When we reach into the past, perhaps it is the universe remembering itself through us. The ancients said the gods created man from clay. Science says we were shaped by stardust. Different languages for the same truth. We come from what came before. Every time we rebuild, we are retelling that first story. The world before the flood, the world that refused to die. Each invention, each rediscovery, is a page turning back towards something that already knew the ending. The wheel, the written word, the map, the telescope. They are all acts of memory disguised as progress. Maybe that is why knowledge feels familiar when we learn it. Because somewhere deep inside, our species has seen it all before. There is a strange comfort in that thought. It means that even if our cities fall, even if the lights go out, the dream will not end. Somewhere, some distant descendant will look at the ruins and feel the same pull we feel now. They will dig and find and wonder, and in that moment of wonder, the circle will close again. The ancients left us clues because they knew what forgetting felt like. They carved their knowledge into mountains, buried it in myth, encoded it in numbers, in stars, in the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. They knew that memory must live where time cannot erase it, in the geometry of the world itself. Every sunrise, every equinox, every slow turn of the seasons is a reminder. You have been here before. The flood recedes, the world begins anew, and civilization rises to remember the old one. Perhaps this is what we call destiny. Not a plan, but a pulse. Look around you now. Our world is once again restless. The climate shifts, the ice melts, the oceans rise. We build higher towers. We reach for the stars, and somewhere deep inside we sense it. That familiar tremor, the rhythm returning. The same cycle that took the ancients may soon take us, and yet, maybe that is not tragedy. Maybe it is continuity, because if they left anything behind, it was not fear, it was hope. The hope that the next world would remember them, that someone, someday, would stand among their ruins and whisper, "You were not the first, you will not be the last." That whisper has reached us. It speaks through stone and shadow, through mathematics and myth. It says, "Do not think you are new. You are the echo of everything that has ever been." So perhaps the Sumerians were not the first civilization. Perhaps they were the first storytellers of a memory that belongs to all of us. And we, now, are their continuation, the latest keepers of the same flame. When you close your eyes tonight and see the stars above you, remember, those stars watched the birth of Sumer, the building of Eridu, the fall of Atlantis, the rise and fall of worlds beyond count. They are witnesses, patient and eternal, waiting for the next dream to begin, because history does not sleep. It only dreams, and through us it dreams again. This is Dreams of History, and the story is far from over. Long before the Sumerians etched their first symbols into clay, before Egypt raised its first stone to the sun, the earth was different. The air was heavier, the stars brighter, and the world moved to a rhythm that modern man has forgotten. Oceans lay lower, rivers wider, and great plains stretched where now the sea lies deep. In that forgotten geography, civilizations rose that the flood would one day erase. They built cities of stone and light, not crude settlements, but vast geometries of meaning. From the Andes to the Himalayas, from the plains of Africa to the islands now lost beneath the waves, their works defied erosion, their purpose defied time. They did not carve to worship, they carved to remember. Every temple, every pillar, every alignment was a sentence in a language the world no longer reads. The ancients called it the First Age, when knowledge flowed freely, when heaven and earth spoke the same tongue. They understood the pulse of stars, the breath of wind, the harmony of sound and stone. To them, energy was not harnessed, it was invited. They built with resonance, not resistance. A single hum could move a block. A chord could shape metal like clay. Their science was not ours. They saw no division between spirit and matter, between God and geometry. Their laboratories were temples, their equations were prayers. And perhaps that is why they lasted so long, because their pursuit of truth was not conquest, but communion. Imagine a city before the flood, towers rising from white terraces, mirrors reflecting sunlight into crystalline channels, water flowing through streets lined with obsidian and gold. The air hums softly with vibration, not from machines, but from harmonics tuned to the frequency of life. In that world, night never meant darkness. Cities glowed like constellations on the earth. Their light came not from fire, but from captured resonance, the song of the planet itself. They spoke to the earth and it answered. They knew of the stars and their cycles. They built observatories that watched the procession of the heavens, mapping not just constellations, but memory, the cosmic clock by which civilizations rise and fall. They understood that time was not linear, but circular, and that every cycle brings both creation and destruction. For thousands of years, they lived in balance. The world was fertile, the weather stable. The magnetic field hummed strong, protecting life. Crops grew tall and unending. The seas were calm. Humanity, or something beyond humanity, thrived. But balance is fragile. Knowledge without humility becomes a mirror that blinds its own creator. They began to look upward, not with wonder, but with ambition. Some sought to pierce the veil between worlds, to command the heavens rather than reflect them. And so, the resonance began to falter. The sky trembled. The magnetic field weakened. Strange lights appeared in the heavens. The elders warned that the cycle was turning, that the great year was ending. The stars had shifted. The balance was breaking. But still, they built higher. Still, they reached beyond what they were meant to hold. Legends tell of a tower that reached the clouds, a machine that spoke to the gods, a weapon of sound that could split mountains. Others whisper of energies pulled from the heart of the earth, of crystals that sang until they shattered. The myths call it Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, different names for the same arrogance. They thought they could master the pulse of the planet. Instead, they struck a note the world could not bear. At first came tremors, subtle, rhythmic, as though the earth were exhaling. Then the ground cracked open and fire leapt from the seas. Volcanoes erupted across continents. Skies turned red. The resonance they had used to build now tore their cities apart. And then, silence. For weeks, the sun was dimmed. Dust blotted out the stars. The rain turned to ash. Crops withered. Oceans rose. Ice melted from the poles and swept across the land like a living tide. The world drowned not in one night, but in many. Cities vanished beneath the waves, their lights extinguished. Yet even in ruin they understood. The priests and astronomers of that dying world gathered what knowledge they could, carved it into stone, sealed it in chambers, encoded it in myths and stars. They knew another age would come, and with it, forgetfulness. And so they hid their message in plain sight, in the alignment of pyramids, in the numbers that define the earth and moon, in the stories that every civilization would remember, of gods descending, of floods, of the beginning and end of time. When the waters finally stilled, the survivors looked upon a changed world. The land had shifted, the stars had moved, the air felt thin, the great lights that once powered their cities were gone. Their gods, or teachers, had vanished. They wandered, scattered, carrying fragments of a language no one could now speak. To the next generations they became myths. To their children's children they became gods. And thus began history, not as a beginning, but as a memory of the end. What we call the dawn of civilization was the twilight of another. When archaeologists unearthed Göbekli Tepe, they found not the beginning of architecture, but the echo of something older. The stones were placed with precision, aligned to stars that no longer rise where they once did. It was not a temple to gods, it was a monument to memory. The first survivors teaching the next age to look up again. In South America, beneath the soil of Bolivia, lie blocks too large to carve with bronze, cut with accuracy no modern machine can replicate. In Egypt, granite shaped to micron precision, a line to true north, its angles matching the constants of the planet itself. These are not coincidences, they are the fingerprints of memory. Our ancestors were not primitive, they were rebuilding. Their myths are the blueprints of what came before. Every flood story, every golden age, every tale of the gods descending and departing. These are not fantasies, they are reflections. Fragments of a lost civilization speaking through time. We have mistaken survival for origin. When the storms finally passed, when the sky cleared to reveal a sun that seemed closer, redder, harsher, The survivors emerged from the mountains, from caves, from the last fragments of dry land. They stepped into silence. The world they had known, the world of light, of harmony, of great cities and endless fields, was gone. The oceans had swallowed it whole. They looked around and saw a planet reborn but empty. The air still shimmered with dust, the rivers ran brown, and the stars above no longer matched the patterns carved into their temples. They understood then that their age had ended. They had lived through the great forgetting. Among them were those who still remembered. Scientists who had once been priests, astronomers who had become storytellers, keepers of sound and measure. They gathered what remained of their knowledge, fragments of geometry, astronomy, medicine, and myth. But without the machines, without the resonance that had once powered their world, all they had left were stories. And so, they spoke. They told their children about the stars that once guided them, the lights that hummed from the mountains, the cities that shone like constellations on the earth. They described the towers that touched the heavens, the temples that sang, the flood that ended it all. They told them not to forget, but generations forget. Language changes, symbols blur, the precise becomes poetic, the truth becomes legend. And slowly, the great science of the ancients became myth. Those who remembered traveled far, across deserts, over mountains, following the stars that still burned familiar. They became the seeds of new civilizations. In the east, a group settled near two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. There they found fertile ground, clay, and the memory of writing. They built small villages, then cities. They called themselves the people of Sumer. In the west, others reached the Nile, carrying the story of the flood. They built temples that mirrored the stars they once studied. Orion, Sirius, the belt of heaven. They remembered how to move stone. They remembered that order came from the sky. They became Egypt. Across the seas, others reached the Indus Valley, the Andes, the Yucatan. They carried the same symbols: spirals, eyes, suns, serpents, repeating like echoes across continents that had never met. Different languages, same memory. Each culture began again, believing itself the first. Yet deep within their myths, the same refrain returned. The gods came from the sky and taught us. The same words, the same images, the same memory. Everywhere. We are told these were separate inventions, coincidence, parallel creation, but the symmetry is too precise, the knowledge too identical. The flood stories match, the star maps align, the architecture speaks the same mathematical language. These were not separate beginnings, they were fragments of the same broken world. In the centuries that followed, humans learned again how to farm, to measure, to build. They rediscovered metals, fire, and wheels, but something was missing: a feeling, a connection to the rhythm that once guided the ancients. They built without resonance, they created without balance. Their temples still pointed to the sky, but the voice that once answered was silent. And so they created gods, to fill the silence, to remember what it felt like when the heavens still spoke back. The priests of Sumer said kingship had descended from heaven, not as a metaphor, but as a memory. The Egyptians said the pharaohs were sons of Ra, half divine, half human. The Mayans said their ancestors came from the stars. The Hindus spoke of an age when beings of light walked among men. All fragments of one story, a world that once lived close to the divine and lost it. Perhaps that is why humanity dreams of paradise. Perhaps our myths of Eden, Atlantis, and heaven are not imagination, but inheritance. We are not seeking a future. We are remembering a past. When archaeologists dig deep enough, they find the same message, written in different tongues. Humans once lived in balance with the earth, and the earth remembered them. We have been trying to rebuild that memory ever since. In the deserts of Egypt, the Great Pyramid still stands. Its stones aligned with mathematical constants that measure the earth itself. Its proportions match the orbit of the planet, the curvature of the horizon. Its corners align perfectly to true north. It was not a tomb. It was a clock, a monument to memory, a map for those who would one day forget, and we forgot, but the stones did not. They waited. Every era of history has looked at those ruins and asked the same question. How? How could they have done this? How could they have known what we only rediscovered thousands of years later? The answer is always the same. They remembered what we lost. Maybe they did not build with machines, but with knowledge of vibration, magnetism, sound. Maybe they moved stone not with muscle, but with frequency. Maybe they used light not as energy, but as understanding. We call it impossible because we no longer understand how to listen to the earth. But they did, and in their silence, they left us an invitation, because even now, the rhythm continues. The same cycle that brought their world to an end is turning again. The poles shift, the temperatures rise, the oceans tremble, and somewhere, deep inside, humanity feels it. That strange ancient echo, as if we have lived through this before. Perhaps that is the true meaning of history. Not a record of what we have done, but a reminder of what we must not forget. And when we stand among the ruins of those who came before, we are not looking at the past. We are looking at ourselves. When the last survivors looked at the ruins of their world, they knew they would never see its light again. But even in loss, they did not despair. They understood something profound, that the world itself was not ending, only turning. The cycle was closing, and one day it would begin again. So they did what the wise always do when time runs out. They began to plant seeds they would never see bloom. They carved their symbols deep into stone, circles, spirals, stars, shapes that would outlive their names. They aligned their monuments to the solstices and equinoxes so that whoever found them would know. The sky is the key. They hid their knowledge in myths and songs, coded in numbers, in the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. They knew that language fades, but pattern remains. The universe always speaks in pattern. And so, when their cities finally sank beneath the waves, their memory did not. It flowed like water, invisible, patient, unstoppable, through time. Every culture that rose afterward would drink from it, without knowing its source. Thousands of years later, a Sumerian scribe pressed a reed into wet clay and wrote the first words of history. He believed he was beginning a new story, but he was only continuing an old one. He wrote of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years, of a flood that swept over, of gods who came from the sky. He thought he was recording myth. In truth, he was remembering, and we too are remembering. When we look at ancient ruins and feel something stir, a strange familiarity, a quiet awe, it is not imagination. It is recognition. Somewhere deep in our collective memory, we have seen this before. We have lived through it before. The resonance that once shaped the stones still hums faintly in us. We are, in a way, their continuation. Their voices speaking again after millennia of silence. They try to tell us that history is not a straight line. It is a circle, vast and slow, repeating until we learn to remember without destruction. Each flood, each fall, each rebirth, all part of one heartbeat, one long inhale and exhale of the earth itself. And perhaps that is why, even now, we feel drawn to the past. Why we search for Atlantis. Why we study the stars. Why we build towers that reach toward heaven. It is not ambition. It is homesickness. We are looking for the world we lost. Somewhere, buried beneath the oceans, beneath mountains and deserts, beneath layers of forgetting, that world still sleeps. Its stones are intact, its knowledge preserved in geometry and light. It waits, as it has always waited, for those who will remember. And maybe one day, when the cycle turns again, when the floods recede and the dust settles, it will rise once more, just as it has before. Not as a return of the old, but as a rebirth of understanding. The ancients said, as above, so below, as within, so without. They knew that what happens in the heavens is mirrored in the soul. that the fall of a civilization is also the fall of memory, and that every act of remembrance rebuilds the bridge between man and the cosmos. We stand now where they once stood, at the edge of forgetting. Our world too trembles. The ice melts, the storms grow stronger, the earth groans beneath our weight. But maybe this time we will listen. Maybe this time we will remember before the flood comes again, because every ruin is a lesson. Every myth is a warning. Every forgotten world is an invitation to awaken. And when the next dawn breaks, it will not be the first, nor will it be the last. This is how worlds live forever, not in stone or empire, but in memory. And as long as someone looks up at the stars and wonders who built the first city, the story will continue. The ancient world is not gone, it is dreaming, and we are the dreamers. When the waters finally withdrew and the earth dried under a new sun, the world was quiet. For generations, the survivors wandered through that silence, building small fires, sleeping under unfamiliar stars. They no longer remembered the cities that once glowed across the horizon, but something inside them refused to fade. A pulse, a memory. It began as whispers among the tribes, stories told beside the fire of a time before the flood, when the world was perfect and bright, when gods walked among men and knowledge was shared like air. Those stories became tradition, and tradition became teaching. The memory had survived, not in metal or stone, but in the human heart. They began again. Wherever the soil was kind, they built. Along rivers, they sowed seeds, not just of crops, but of civilization. The first villages rose on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, where the ground was rich with silt left by retreating floods. There, humans remembered the art of cultivation, how to command water, how to read the stars for seasons, how to measure time by the moon. Each act of creation was also an act of remembrance. At night, they watched the constellations move slowly across the black sky. They no longer knew the names their ancestors had given them, but they could feel the rhythm, the same silent harmony that had once guided entire worlds. And slowly, civilization returned. Clay tablets appeared, cylinders carved with symbols, wedges pressed in patterns. The first written words. At first they spoke of trade and harvest, of kings and offerings. But hidden between the lines were older echoes, the story of a flood, a list of kings who reigned for impossible spans, a sky that once fell silent. They were trying to remember. The people of Sumer said the gift of writing came from the god Enki, who taught mankind how to name the world, because to name is to preserve, to turn sound into eternity. To them, language was not invention, it was resurrection. The city of Eridu became their first sacred center. They built it where the rivers met. Water, the eternal symbol of life and rebirth. Its temple, the house of the deep waters, honored the memory of Enki, the god of wisdom, the keeper of secrets buried beneath the flood. In their myths, he was not only a god, he was the echo of the old world's teachers, the ones who had saved the fragments of knowledge before the deluge. And then came others. Uruk, the city of walls and stars. Nippur, where the calendar was born. Lagash, where law and governance took shape. Every city was built as a reflection of the heavens, its streets aligned to constellations, its temples echoing the geometry of the stars. They were not just building cities, they were rebuilding the memory of a lost age. Across the sea, the Nile mirrored the pattern. There too survivors had gathered, guided by the same remembrance of order. They built temples that rose from the desert, like memories turned to stone. Each one spoke the same language: symmetry, number, light. Egypt became the earth's mirror of the sky. Their priests said the gods had once lived among them during the Zep Tepi, the first time. And though that age was gone, they built their temples in its honor. Each pillar, each carving, each angle was designed not for beauty, but for resonance. The same principle the world before had mastered. They believed that through precise harmony, the spirit of the gods, the memory of that world, could be summoned again. In the east, in the Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa appeared, their streets laid in perfect grids, their drainage systems advanced beyond their age. No weapons, no conquest, only structure, symmetry, balance, as if the builders remembered peace as the natural state of the world. And far to the west, in the jungles of the Yucatan, another echo rose, the Maya. They too measured time by the stars. They spoke of cycles, of suns that rise and fall. Their calendars repeated the same cosmic pattern the Sumerians once charted, a grand circle of destruction and renewal, of memory and forgetting. Different continents, different ages, one rhythm. Everywhere humanity began again, the same pattern emerged. Alignment with the heavens, reverence for water, the serpent as symbol of wisdom, the triangle, the eye, the sun. Even without contact, their memories matched. They were remembering together. And through them, the world before the flood began to live again. Not as fact, but as faith. Not as knowledge, but as intuition. The ancients understood something we have only begun to rediscover. Memory is not just of the mind, it is of the world. Every act of creation, every piece of music, every story told by firelight is a way of bringing the past forward. That is why civilizations are born near rivers. Water carries memory. That is why temples reach toward the sky. Light carries remembrance. That is why we still look at the stars. Because we have seen them before. Civilization was not born, it was remembered. And the people of that new world, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Mayans, the builders of the Indus, they were not inventors of history. They were the heirs of memory. Each in their own way, they were rebuilding what had been lost. One brick, one word, one prayer at a time. They did not call it rediscovery. They called it worship, because to remember the old world was to feel the divine once more. In their temples, in their mathematics, in their stories of gods who came from the heavens, they left us the same message carved in the oldest code of all. That knowledge is a circle, and humanity is its keeper. And though ages would rise and fall, though empires would burn and be rebuilt, the pulse of that first world would never stop. It would move through time, waiting for us to hear it again. When humans learned again to build and write, they did something extraordinary. They began to hide their memories in plain sight. They encoded their knowledge not in machines, but in myth, so that even when the tools were lost, the truth would endure. They understood that words fade, but symbols last, and so they spoke in the oldest language of all, geometry. Every ancient monument is a sentence written in that language. Each ratio, each angle, each shadow cast by the sun was chosen with purpose. In Sumer, the ziggurats rose like stairways between heaven and earth. Their steps mirrored the 7 spheres of the sky, moon, sun, and the 5 visible planets. They were not only temples, but maps of the cosmos. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid was built to embody the constant of the world itself. Its height and perimeter reflect the ratio between Earth and Moon. Its position encodes the speed of light. Its shadow marks the solstice and equinox with perfect precision. It is less a tomb than a clock, keeping time not for kings but for civilization. A reminder carved into stone that the world moves in cycles, and that memory returns with every turn. In India, temple towers rose as fractal mountains, each layer smaller, each spire echoing the last, a visual echo of the infinite. Their architects called it Vastu Shastra, the science of harmony between man and universe. They aligned their temples with the same stars as Egypt and Sumer, because all three remembered the same pattern. The heavens above were the blueprint for the world below. Even their myths carried geometry hidden in story. The gods of every culture were not random. They were personifications of numbers and forces. The Trinity appears everywhere. 3 gods, 3 realms, 3 ages. In Egypt, Osiris, Isis, Horus. In India, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. In Sumer, Anu, Enki, Enlil. Different names, same principle. Creation, preservation, destruction, the cycle of the world. They used myth the way we use code, to protect and transmit knowledge across generations. What we call legend, they called memory made safe. Because when fire and flood return, story survives. Even time itself became sacred. The ancients did not count years to measure age. They counted to remember rhythm. The Sumerians divided time into Sars and Neros, cosmic units based on celestial motion. The Mayans did the same, measuring time in cycles of 13 and 20. The sacred count of the universe, repeated in DNA, in breath, in music. To them, mathematics was not invention. It was revelation, and across every land, the serpent returned, coiled in stone, carved into walls, sliding across the heavens as the Milky Way. It represented the eternal, the spiral of knowledge, the movement of energy. They called it Kundalini, Ouroboros, Quetzalcoatl, the force that devours itself to be born again. Even now, it whispers through science, in the spirals of galaxies, in the double helix of our blood, in the storms that turn endlessly across the seas. Nothing the ancients built was random. They were writing in a language we forgot how to read. Look closer, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The Great Pyramid's latitude mirrors the number of the speed of light. The layout of Teotihuacan mirrors the orbit of planets. Stonehenge marks lunar and solar eclipses with millimeter accuracy. In Angkor Wat, the bas-reliefs record the length of the Great Year, 25,920 years, the precession of the equinoxes. All across the world, they were saying the same thing. Time is a circle, and you are inside it. These were not primitive people gazing upward in fear. They were astronomers, engineers, philosophers, custodians of a science older than history, a science that united heaven and earth. We think of them as builders of stone, but they were actually builders of memory. Every temple was a databank, every myth an encrypted archive, every festival a reenactment of cosmic law. When the priests of Egypt lifted the Ankh, they were holding the symbol of life eternal, a loop for the infinite, a cross for the material, a reminder that one cannot exist without the other. When the Sumerians traced the spiral of the heavens on clay, they were marking not just time, but destiny, the turning of ages, the rise and fall of worlds. When the Mayans counted their long cycles, they were watching for the same alignment that had destroyed the last world, a reminder that when the sky repeats, the earth will too. These were warnings, not myths, maps, not metaphors, but to preserve their meaning, the ancients wrapped truth in story, because only story survives forgetting. Only myth can outlive empire. Thousands of years passed, and still the pattern endured. Even as the languages changed, the shapes stayed the same. From the temples of Greece to the cathedrals of Europe, the proportions of the ancients survived. The golden ratio, the sacred circle, the cross of the heavens. Their geometry still shapes our cities, our art, our very sense of beauty. We carry it unconsciously, like a genetic memory that never fades. The world before the flood is gone, but its design remains everywhere we look, in the curvature of the earth, in the ratio of the human body, in the pulse of the heart. The ancients would say, the universe remembers itself through you, and maybe they were right, because the further we advance, the closer our discoveries come to their truths. Quantum physics now speaks of vibration as the foundation of reality. Frequency, resonance, energy, the same language they once used to shape stone. We say we are discovering it, but perhaps we are only remembering. Time passed, and the world changed again. Empires rose and fell, new languages were born, new gods named. The ancient symbols weathered and faded, their meanings wrapped in legend. But the geometry remained. It waited in silence, in architecture, in art, in the quiet logic of the human mind. Even when we forgot the words, we kept the shapes. We built cathedrals with the same proportions as the pyramids. We painted with the same symmetry found in Sumerian mosaics. We measured beauty by ratios older than civilization itself. We thought we were creating something new. We were remembering. The same numbers reappeared everywhere. In music, in motion, in the spirals of seashells and galaxies. The ancients called it harmony. We call it physics, but the song is the same. Through ages of war and empire, of faith and doubt, the old knowledge survived, hidden in mystery schools, carried through secret orders, whispered in the writings of philosophers who spoke in riddles. They knew that truth is eternal, and that the world moves in cycles of revelation and forgetting. Every few thousand years, the pulse returns, a new awakening, another chance to remember. The Renaissance was one of those moments. Leonardo, Copernicus, Kepler. They rediscovered what the ancients already knew, that the universe moves by law, by music, by number. They found harmony in motion, rhythm in the planets, geometry in the body. They were scientists, but they were also mystics. Their instruments were modern, but their inspiration was ancient. Even now, our technology echoes the same quest. We look to the stars, just as our ancestors did, mapping the heavens for answers that feel strangely familiar. We split atoms and discover vibration. We peer into DNA and find spirals. We look into space and find the same ratios written across the galaxies. The deeper we search, the more ancient everything begins to feel. It is as though the universe itself is a memory, and we are its dream of rediscovery. All of human progress, our art, our science, our longing to know, may not be invention at all. It may be remembrance, the slow return of a song the earth has sung before. The ancients left us more than ruins. They left a mirror. When we study their monuments, their myths, their numbers, we are not just learning about them. We are seeing ourselves reflected through time. The same questions, the same desire to understand what we are and where we came from. We have always built to remember. We raise monuments not only to our gods, but to our own memory of light. And each stone we place, each word we write, is part of the same great effort. To rebuild the bridge between heaven and earth. Perhaps that is what civilization truly is. Not progress, but the act of remembering. Every discovery, every revelation, every invention is a recollection of something we once knew before the flood, before the forgetting. And as the world now stands on the edge of another turning, as the ice melts and the earth shifts once more, we feel the same tension that the ancients must have felt. A quiet, growing awareness that something vast is awakening again. Maybe that is why humanity is once more obsessed with its origins, with ancient mysteries, lost worlds, forgotten gods. It is not curiosity, it is memory. The pulse is returning. The same rhythm that built the ziggurat and the pyramid, that guided the alignment of stars and temples, that whispered through the ages of fire and flood. It beats again, and it calls us not backward, but inward, because what the ancients knew, and what we are only beginning to rediscover, is that memory is not behind us, it is within us. We are not separate from the story. We are the continuation of it. The builders of the first world are not gone. Their dream lives on in our science, our art, our longing for truth. And when we remember enough, the circle will close, and the world will wake again to what it has always been. The past is not lost. It is only waiting for us to remember. This is Dreams of History, and the dream is still alive. There is a silence between myth and science, a space where both seem to reach for the same truth from opposite directions. The ancients lived in that space. They did not divide the world into matter and spirit, into faith and proof. To them, everything was alive. Every sound, every shape, every ray of light was part of a single living system. They called it harmony. We call it physics. What we have forgotten, they knew by instinct, that the universe is made not of objects, but of vibration, that every atom hums, every planet sings, every living being resonates with a frequency of its own. They did not need telescopes or microscopes to know this. They could feel it in the stones beneath their feet, in the air around their temples, in the pulse of their own hearts. The builders of the old world mastered resonance, the science of sound as creation itself. They used it not to destroy, but to move, to heal, to connect. When they built, they tuned their structures like instruments. Every stone was chosen for its tone, every corridor for its echo. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb. It was a symphony in stone. Its chambers resonate at 432 hertz. The same frequency ancient musicians said could calm the human heart and mirror the rhythm of the earth itself. Inside, the air vibrates as if alive. If you speak, your voice becomes part of the architecture. It is not a building. It is a device that remembers sound. In Sumer, priests used drums and chants to align their ceremonies with the movement of the stars. Their temples were built upon underground chambers where sound would gather and rise, amplifying their voices until they seemed to come from the sky itself. The ancients understood that sound could open consciousness, bridge the seen and the unseen. In India, the same science lived in the syllable Om, the vibrations said to have created the universe, the sound from which all others emerged. Their yogis said every being is a note in the divine chord, and harmony with the world begins when you find your own frequency. In Greece, Pythagoras called it the music of the spheres, the belief that the planets move according to mathematical ratios that produce a cosmic harmony. He taught that everything, from orbits to emotions, follows patterns of vibration. What the ancients sang, we now measure as wavelengths and frequency, different words, same song. But their understanding went beyond sound. They knew that vibration shaped form. They carved spirals into stone, not for decoration, but for resonance. They arranged temples on ley lines, the invisible veins of energy that flow through the earth. They built stone circles and pyramids where those currents met, knowing that geometry could focus and amplify what they called life force, what we might now call electromagnetic energy. Modern science has begun to confirm what they intuited. When sound passes through water or sand, it shapes perfect patterns, circles, mandalas, stars. Cymatics we call it now. But they had already carved those same shapes on the walls of their temples, as if to remind us that creation is music made visible. The forgotten science of the ancients was not superstition. It was synthesis. They saw no boundary between the physical and the divine. They understood that every thought, every breath, every heartbeat sends ripples through the universe. They lived by the idea that harmony with those ripples was the key to balance, for the body, for the world, for the stars themselves. Their architecture reflected that belief. They built in ratios that mirrored the proportions of the human body, the same ratios we now call the golden mean. The temple and the man were reflections of one another. To enter a sacred space was to step into the geometry of creation itself. Even medicine was music. The Egyptians used sound to heal wounds, chanting in tones that restored the flow of energy through the body. The Greeks used lyres and flutes to treat melancholy and madness. They believed illness was dissonance and healing was harmony restored. We treat disease with chemicals. They treated it with resonance, and beneath it all, they carried a warning. They knew that harmony could become chaos, that the same vibration that builds can also destroy. Their myths tell of a time when humanity used resonance to shake the mountains and call down fire from the sky. When arrogance broke the balance and the flood came, sound had become power, and power had forgotten its purpose. Perhaps that is why the survivors hid their science behind story. They buried it in myth, so that only those ready to understand its balance could find it again. They turned physics into poetry to protect it from those who would use it as a weapon. And now, millennia later, we are finding it again, through string theory, through quantum resonance, through the study of vibration as the architecture of matter. The ancients told us that sound creates form. Now we watch particles dance to invisible frequencies and call it science. We say we are discovering, but we are only remembering. Everything that exists is music slowed into matter. Every thought is a note, every atom a song. And when we live in harmony with that song, we touch the wisdom the ancients never lost. They built their world upon that knowing, and when it fell, they left us the score, carved in stone, painted in stars, waiting for us to hear it again. And now, perhaps for the first time in ages, the world is beginning to listen. The ancients built as if they were tuning the earth itself. Their monuments were not only structures, they were instruments. Each stone, each angle, each alignment was a note in the symphony of the planet. They believed the earth had its own song, a hum that moved through mountains and oceans, through every living thing. We call it the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the world. They called it the voice of creation. In places where this voice was strongest, they built. Stonehenge in England, the Great Pyramid in Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the terraces of Machu Picchu, all rise where the Earth's energy converges. These sites are not random. They form a network, a grid that encircles the globe, connecting mountain to desert, sea to sky. Even separated by oceans and time, their builders followed the same invisible map. How did they know? How could people without satellites or compasses align their monuments across continents, matching latitudes, longitudes, and star paths? Perhaps because they did not measure with tools, they measured with the earth itself. They felt energy the way we feel gravity, as something alive beneath their feet. The stones they used were not chosen for beauty or convenience, but for their properties. Granite, limestone, basalt, all capable of carrying vibration. Inside the pyramids, these materials resonate when struck, amplifying sound until it becomes physical. In temples across the world, narrow corridors and domed chambers create standing waves that vibrate the body, altering consciousness. Visitors describe a sense of timelessness, a silence that feels alive. It is not imagination, it is resonance. Modern researchers have found that the chambers of the Great Pyramid correspond to harmonic frequencies of the Earth. Its base matches the curvature of the planet. Its height encodes the ratio between Earth and Moon. It is as if the builders were tuning the structure to the planet itself. When light enters, it travels through the same geometry that governs atomic structure. A harmony of proportion that repeats from the smallest particle to the largest star. They were building not in imitation of the universe, but in collaboration with it. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman curve like waves, their blocks fitted with precision so tight that no blade can pass between them. Each block is cut with multiple angles, designed to distribute energy through the entire structure. When struck, the walls ring like bells. The builders were not only shaping stone, they were shaping sound. At Pumapunku, the stones bear interlocking notches and channels, as if they were once part of a mechanism, a harmonic machine, now long silent. Its fragments are scattered, but even in ruin they hum with mystery, their precision beyond the reach of ancient tools as we understand them. In India, the great temples of Ellora and Kailasa were carved downward from a single mountain, solid rock turned into open space. Every chamber, every column resonates. Chant there, and the walls answer you. The builders called it divine architecture. The science of sound turned to stone. Across the sea in Angkor Wat, the towers align with the stars of Draco and the Milky Way, their proportions tuned to the lunar cycle. When the monsoon comes, water fills the outer moats, turning the temple into a reflection of the heavens, a cosmic mirror. The builders had mastered not only sound, but light, shadow, and water, the four elements of resonance. We look at these places and call them miracles, but they are not miracles, they are instructions. They show that when knowledge, faith, and nature are in harmony, architecture becomes more than shelter. It becomes memory. Even our modern world carries their echo. Skyscrapers sway in rhythm with the wind, tuned to frequencies that prevent collapse. Bridges hum like strings when cars pass over them. Our cities light up in grids, glowing like the constellations our ancestors followed. We build in steel and glass. But we are still chasing the same symmetry, the same perfection of proportion. We say our technology is new, but at its core, it follows their principles. Electricity hums, sound vibrates, light bends, all energy moving in harmony. The ancients understood that energy is not a tool. It is a relationship. When treated with respect, it sustains life. When abused, it destroys. That was the lesson of the flood, the memory we were meant to keep. In every myth, the fall of the old world came not from ignorance, but from arrogance, from using knowledge without wisdom. The Atlanteans, the Lemurians, the builders of the First Age. They reached beyond balance, turned harmony into weapon, resonance into command. The earth responded, as it always does. It reset, and when the survivors rebuilt, they encoded that warning into their science. Harmony above all, balance between heaven and earth. Never power without purpose. That principle is carved into every ancient temple, hidden in every myth of gods who punish pride, woven into every story of floods and fire. They were not just tales of divine wrath. They were reminders, because every age forgets, and every age remembers too late. But perhaps this time will be different. Perhaps now, as we rediscover the laws of vibration, as we build machines that manipulate sound and light, we will remember what they tried to teach, that science without reverence is ruin, and knowledge without memory is noise. Maybe that is the real forgotten science, not the power to move stone, but the wisdom to move with the universe, to live in resonance, not resistance. We are surrounded by their message. It hums beneath our feet, glows in our cities, beats within our hearts. And if we listen closely enough, we can still hear it. The ancient chord that began the world, the vibration that built the first civilization, the song that has never truly stopped, because the universe is still singing. We just have to remember the tune. The further we advance, the more ancient we become. Our machines grow smarter, our science more complex, and yet every new discovery feels strangely familiar. Like déjà vu written across the stars, we split atoms and see spirals. We study space and find symmetry. We measure time and uncover cycles that echo those of the old world. It is as if the universe is gently reminding us, you have been here before. Quantum physics now speaks a language the ancients once whispered in stone. It tells us that everything is connected, that matter is vibration, that observation itself shapes reality. What mystics called spirit, scientists now call energy. What priests once sang as prayers, physicists call frequency. The two ends of time are meeting again. For centuries, we built outward. Towers of steel, engines of power, networks of signal and light. Now for the first time, we are building inward, into the atom, into the neuron, into the mind. And there, in the smallest spaces, we are finding the same geometry carved on the walls of Sumerian temples, the same golden ratios that formed the pyramids, the same spirals drawn in the sand by forgotten hands. It is not coincidence, it is continuity. The ancients spoke of the eye of the mind, a place where the universe sees itself through us. Today, we call it consciousness. And as we explore it, we are beginning to understand what they knew, that thought is energy, and energy shapes reality. Every intention, every emotion, every act of awareness ripples outward through creation. They built temples to amplify that power. We build neural networks to simulate it. The purpose is the same, to understand the mind of the cosmos. Modern science is rediscovering vibration in every field. In medicine, doctors use frequency to heal. Ultrasound, sound therapy, brainwave entrainment. In technology, we move information not with wires, but with waves. In astronomy, we listen to the hum of distant galaxies and call it cosmic background radiation. In biology, we find that the body's cells communicate through resonance, not contact. It is all vibration, all song. The old world did not vanish. It became data, and through our instruments, we are now hearing the echoes of their forgotten science. Somewhere, in laboratories lit by neon, scientists are learning to move particles with sound, to levitate droplets of water, to shape matter without touch. They call it acoustic levitation. The ancients called it the voice of God. Somewhere else, engineers are studying resonance to create structures that respond to earthquakes, buildings that sway in harmony with the earth rather than resist it. The ancients already built this way. Their temples still stand. Ours still crack. We think we are inventing. We are remembering, and as memory returns, something deeper awakens. A new awareness that perhaps we were never separate from the universe at all. That consciousness and matter, spirit and science, heaven and earth, are one and the same. Reflections of a single vibration, a single dream echoing through eternity. The Sumerians said kingship descended from heaven. Maybe they meant that knowledge did too. That wisdom is not something we create, but something that visits us when we are ready to listen. And maybe that is happening again. Everywhere, across the world, people are searching, not for wealth or power, but for meaning. They are turning back to the stars, to the myths, to the ruins, to the frequencies that once shaped worlds. They are remembering that we are not masters of the earth. We are its instruments. We were meant to play in harmony, not in control. The forgotten science is not gone. It lives in every heartbeat, every breath, every sound that fills the space between moments. It is the pulse of life itself. The same vibration that built the first city, that shaped the first word, that sang the universe into being. We have forgotten its language, but not its melody. That melody is returning, through science, through art, through the quiet intuition that tells us there is more to this world than matter and noise. It hums beneath the static of our lives, waiting for us to stop, to breathe, to remember. And when we do, the walls of time dissolve. The ancients are no longer behind us, and we are no longer ahead. We meet in the middle, in the still point of the eternal song, the song that began before the flood, the song that survived in clay and stone, the song that rises again, each time humanity remembers what it has forgotten. This is the forgotten science. This is the return of the ancient sound. And this is the voice of a world that never truly ended, only slept beneath the noise of progress, waiting for a dreamer to wake it. The dreamer is us, and the dream is still alive. This is Dreams of History, and history is remembering itself.